At the Conwell estate, Klein arrives expecting a simple hunting contest, but the moment he steps out of the carriage, the place already smells like a trap. Dalton's castle is ridiculously grand. The guests are feasting like nobles at a royal banquet, and the whole event feels less like a hunt and more like a flexing contest for greedy branch family trash. But the real ugliness shows itself when Dalton releases his starving dogs into the forest, only to shoot them down like toys. And if that wasn't disgusting enough, he even dares to touch Erin, calling her Klein's pet maid like he doesn't value his wrist. Klein instantly twists his hand and warns him to back off, but Dalton only smiles like a villain who already wrote his own death certificate. Soon, Klein follows him into the forest alone, and that is when Dalton finally reveals the real hunt. Dog corpses are scattered everywhere, mercenaries surround the area, archers take aim, and Dalton proudly declares that Klein is the final prey. Unfortunately for him, he just picked a fight with the wrong kid. As Dalton mocks the Rhineland family and spits on the future Burkle died to protect, something inside Klein snaps. The weak second son disappears, and the former king of death begins to wake up. Demonic energy floods the forest, skeletons rise from the ground, and the hunters quickly realize they were never chasing prey. What follows is less a battle and more an execution. Klein unleashes his undead army, sending skeletons crashing into the mercenaries from every direction. Arrows become meaningless, swords shatter, and terrified men are dragged down by the very dead they thought they had buried. One by one, the mercenaries are slaughtered. Meanwhile, Dalton realizes his fuck. No matter how many times he chops off the head of the skeletons, it just keeps regenerating. Looking at Klein, his bright mind thinks he would just take out Klein. Well, his cooked because Klein had already seen this. Klein then used his meteor sword slash, ending his sadistic life. So how did it end like this? Let's go back a bit. For centuries, the name Archimonde was enough to send kingdoms into panic. As the strongest necromancer the world had ever known, he commanded armies of the dead and spread terror across the continent. No warrior, king, or army could stop him. That is, until the legendary hero Burkle Rhineland finally brought his reign to an end by cutting him down, or so everyone thought. When he opens his eyes, he is no longer on the battlefield. Instead, he is inside a baby's body. The maids around him are excited because the young lord has finally made a sound. They try to make him say mama, and even show him his mother, the Duchess. But Archimonde's body feels stiff, and before he can understand what is happening, his mouth moves on its own. Instead of acting like a normal baby, he suddenly chants a necromantic formula, calling upon darkness, minions, and soldiers. The maids are horrified because the newborn baby just shouted like a full-grown demon summoner. 15 years pass after that crazy incident. The scene then moves to the Rhineland Duchy, where the baby has grown into a beautiful young boy named Klein. The maids are stunned by his face and hair, calling him a masterpiece of the gods. But while everyone is admiring him, Klein is already tired of the nonsense surrounding his life. That nonsense comes in the form of Priest Garrison Berkman from the Holy Order. The moment Garrison sees Klein, he starts shouting about evil spirits and Archimonde again. This guy is built more like a muscular demon than a priest, yet he keeps acting like he is the Holy One. He insists that Archimonde's soul is still inside Klein's body and that the evil spirit must be purified again and again. Klein denies being Archimonde, but Garrison instantly claims that Klein's face looks exactly like Archimonde's. This annoys Klein so much that he silently calls the priest a crazy bastard over and over again while walking away. But Garrison does not stop. As punishment for Klein's attitude, he orders another naked holy water bath, which makes Klein wonder if this priest is even human. Klein then thinks back to how all of this started. In his previous life, his head had clearly been cut off, yet somehow he opened his eyes again inside a baby's body. And because the first words he shouted were Archimonde's necromantic spell, everyone treated him like a demon from the beginning. Because of that, he was locked inside a monastery for 7 long years. That was also where he met Garrison, the man who called himself a priest of the Holy Order. From that point on, Klein was forced through all kinds of so-called purification rituals. There were holy water baths, Garrison's 24/7 prayer song, and even fire purification. In simple terms, the poor kid was tortured in the name of religion. Now, 5 years after returning from the monastery, Klein is still being watched. His personal maid Aren only wants him to live proudly as a proper descendant of the Rhineland family. She even prepares things for him out of care. But when Klein reacts too harshly, he immediately regrets it, realizing she worked hard for him with her small hands. Unfortunately, the emotional moment is ruined when Klein finds out that the embarrassing hat was actually made by Garrison. The guilt disappears instantly, and Klein wants nothing more than to throw the thing away. Garrison, however, is deeply moved, thinking Klein wore the hat because he appreciated it. But Klein doesn't give two shit and rips it off. Just then, Dunkel, the leader of the Red Chariot Knights, arrives and asks whether the purification ritual is finally over. Dunkel reminds Garrison that the rumors about Klein being Archimonde are already over 10 years old, and even the Order has said there are no more issues. But Garrison refuses to let go of his suspicion. He says there is always a what if, and before leaving, he tells Klein that the next purification ritual is scheduled for Friday. Klein is completely fed up. After receiving a towel, he tells Eren that he is definitely not Archimonde anymore, but inside he admits the truth. He really is Archimonde. He just cannot say it out loud, because if he does, there is no telling what kind of torture Garrison will prepare next. Since he was reborn, he has lived under constant surveillance. Because of the rumors from his childhood, he spent 7 years locked away in a monastery. He thought returning to the duchy would finally give him some freedom, but instead, Garrison followed him like a curse. Eren then explains that Garrison is not just some random priest. He is an agent of the Holy Order, which is a title given only to the strongest members of the Order. Unless it is the Duke himself, almost no one in the family can stand against him. This makes Klein realize just how powerful the Holy Order is, but it also reminds him how powerful the Rhineland family is. Curious, Klein asks who the strongest Duke in the family's history was. Eren first thinks about the current 7th Duke, Klein's father, but Klein already knows the answer. The strongest was the 1st Duke, Berkel Rhineland. The servants are happy because they think Klein admires the 1st Duke the most. After all, he keeps staring at Berkel's portrait. But Klein's thoughts are completely different from what they imagine. He is not admiring Berkel, he is staring at the man who killed him. Klein realizes that 200 years have passed since Berkel founded the Rhineland family. He still cannot believe it, but he has no choice but to accept the truth. He, the Necromancer Archimonde, has been reborn as Klein Rhineland, a descendant of the very man who ended his life. Sometime later, Klein is jolted awake, haunted by a dream of Berkel's final words before killing him in his previous life. He let out a heavy sigh and cursed under his breath as his thoughts drifted to his new reality. In his past life, he had been Archimonde, the legendary necromancer feared across the continent as the devil himself. Consumed by rage, he had nearly brought the entire continent to ruin before ultimately falling to the sword of the Northern Knight, Berkel Rhineland. Yet death had not been the end, and when Archimonde opened his eyes once more, 200 years had passed since his defeat. And the most unbelievable part was that he had been reborn as a descendant of the very man who had slain him. Now Archimonde was Klein Rhineland, and he retained every memory of his former life. Checking out his appearance for what felt like the 100th time, Klein still couldn't get used to his new appearance, especially his hair. Suddenly, a voice interrupts Klein's thoughts, telling him that he was talking in his sleep. Alarmed, Klein looks up to see that it's his eternal nemesis, Garrison, asking whether Klein dreamt of his time as Archimonde. Speaking about Garrison, he is a lunatic priest who believes that Klein is Archimonde, and for years he has been torturing Klein because of this belief. Klein quickly tries to explain that he was talking in his dream because of stress. But Irene suddenly pops out to ruin his life. Irene confidently yells that she heard everything Klein said while he was sleeping. She then repeats it word for word, describing how Klein wants to destroy the continent, and even mentions that he called himself Archimonde. Klein frantically tries to stop her, but Eren refuses to back down while Garrison quietly listens to her. Fortunately, Klein's butler Berkman steps into the room at that moment to inform Klein that the swordsmanship demonstration will start soon. However, the damage has already been done as Garrison has already heard everything he needs to hear about Klein's dream. Garrison then thanks Eren for the unsolicited report and firmly announces that Klein will be receiving a double purification ritual. Seeing the scary look on Garrison's face, Klein is terrified as he covers Eren's mouth with his hand before she gets him into more trouble. Afterwards, Klein barks at the priest, loudly telling him to back off. Shortly after, Klein and Eren head to the training hall with the butler Berkman to watch the swordsmanship demonstration. When Klein asks Berkman about the event, Berkman simply tells him that the Duke ordered him to attend. Klein is surprised to hear this, and while he wonders why, Eren asks whether she can take his cookie. Klein lets her have it, but when Berkman tries to remind Eren of her position, Klein tells him not to be so hard on her since she loves cookies so much. Seeing that Klein doesn't mind, Berkman decides not to be so stuck up. Klein then asks Berkman why the Duke wants him to attend the event since it's the first time Klein has been invited to a demonstration. Berkman explains that it is because the collateral branches have come to visit. The collateral branches consist of relatives who are not part of the direct bloodline, and Klein knows they are not here for anything good because they are filled with a bunch of pesky little leeches. As Klein makes his way in, everyone turns to stare at him with disdainful glances. Some even make a mockery of him for being mistaken for the reincarnation of Archimonde. Meanwhile, others taunt him to his face, mentioning how Klein was locked away in a monastery for 7 years. Someone even calls him a jinx and warns his brother to beware, or Klein might put a curse on him. Klein takes note of the 2 guys who happen to be his maternal cousins and notices another distant group of relatives stuffing their faces like pigs. Just then, Klein notices a girl in the corner staring intently at him. He recalls that she's one of the cousins from the West. While he's still trying to figure out who she is, his maternal cousins from earlier angrily reprimand Klein for ignoring them. But Klein continues to pay them no attention, making them infuriated. As maternal cousins, they even have the nerve to call the Rhineland family theirs, a comparison that Klein finds laughable. and the annoying thing is that he doesn't even remember their names because they are that insignificant. The major reason these pesky strangers from collateral branches are acting like they own the place is that the main line where Klein was born is currently falling apart. The mere fact that they dare to look down on Klein shows that no one respects the main line anymore. Klein finally makes his way to the balcony, from where he watches two boys sparring. The purple-haired dude named Dalton struggles to block attacks from his opponent, Delane. Despite clearly having a tough time, Dalton curses loudly, telling Delane to stop holding back and come at him for real. Meanwhile, Delane seems to be breezing through without any effort as he tells Dalton that the match is already decided. However, Dalton refuses to back down even though his opponent has the advantage. While observing the match, Klein notes that the main line of the Rhineland family has one last hope left, and that is Delane, Klein's half-brother. Delane is the eldest son of the Rhineland family, well known for being a peerless genius. Thanks to Delane's talent, the Rhineland family still enjoyed a reputation as a lineage of master swordsmen. However, Dalton, a member of a collateral branch, seemed intent on dragging that reputation through the mud. As Klein continues to watch them spar, his eyes suddenly light up. This is his first time seeing a familiar swordsmanship in his new body. As Dalton charges forward to attack, Delane swiftly dodges and the next moment appears behind Dalton. Klein's eyes continue to sparkle, and as he observes Delane's swordsmanship, Klein can clearly see the footwork, the timing of the launch, and even the mana flow. Meanwhile, the attack takes Dalton by surprise, and it is none other than the Rhineland secret technique called Meteor Sword. With a single strike, Delane unleashes the Meteor Sword on Dalton, effortlessly ending the match. Pointing his wooden sword at Dalton, Delane calmly reminded him of his earlier words that the match had already been decided from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the audience is amazed by Delane's sword technique, and they praise him for confidently pulling off the Rhineland family's signature technique in front of everyone. This show from Delane wasn't just a simple, impressive technique, but it was meant as a statement to the collateral branches to show them that the main line is still strong. After observing the match, Klein begins to rub his eye, wondering what just happened to him. But before he can figure it out, Delane calls out to him. Delane cheerfully greets Klein, asking how long he's been watching, and says that Klein should have told him he was coming to the demonstration. He awkwardly claims that he would have tried to fight Dalton a little harder if he knew Klein was watching. Klein quietly observes his so-called half-brother and admits that Delane is actually impressive. Klein also notes that Delane has good looks, excellent talent, and a great personality. Klein then asks Delane why the collateral branches came, as he wonders if they came to squeeze out money from the main line. Before Delane can respond, the Duke interrupts them, commending Delane for doing a great job. He also praises Delane for mastering the family's meteor sword technique. Speaking about the Duke, he is Heinkel Rhineland, Delane, and Klein's father, and the 7th Duke of Rhineland. From the way Heinkel looks at Delane and praises him, Klein guesses that Delane must be the last shred of pride that Heinkel is holding on to. Just then, a knight of Rhineland named Dunkel also praises Delane for his mana control and precision. Dunkel proudly declares that no knight at that age can even attempt what Delane has achieved. Delane tries to be humble, but Heinkel reminds him of the final words of their ancestor Berkel, which state that a knight of Rhineland must always be the greatest in the empire. He then tells Delane to carve those words into his heart and use them as a yardstick moving forward. After Delane thanks him, Heinkel turns to face Klein, making him a bit uneasy. Heinkel then places his hand on Klein but feels no mana inside him. Klein apologizes for being mediocre but notices that Heinkel doesn't seem angry with him. This is because such feelings are only for someone with potential, and since Klein has none, Heinkel probably considers him worthless trash not worth his strength. Dunkel then begs Heinkel to spare Klein and explains that Klein's poor aptitude is because he wasted his time at the monastery. Meanwhile, the audience begins to gossip about Klein's poor skills and even compares him to his half-brother. They also begin to trash-talk the main line for being incompetent, and they use this excuse to argue that the collateral branches should take over. While everyone talks trash about Klein, Heinkel comforts him, telling him that there are other paths to take besides the sword path. Klein, on the other hand, doesn't care about the insults, but the fact that the family the great Berkel fought for is finished. He couldn't accept that this trashy, greedy bunch is the same trash Berkel risked his life for back then. Soon afterward, Delane, Heinkel, and Dunkel leave the hall, and trouble immediately finds Klein. Seeing that Klein's backers have all left, Dalton starts mocking Klein for not having the aptitude for swordsmanship. As Dalton continues to provoke him, Klein turns around to trash him for being a man-whore behind the scenes. This infuriates Dalton, and he wonders how Klein knows, since he has been doing it quietly behind the scenes. Apparently, Dalton has been paying the girls off to keep things under wraps, but Klein somehow found out about it. Dalton tries to attack him, but Klein effortlessly trips him up, sending him face down into the ground. Klein then turns around, ignoring Dalton like a piece of roadside trash, and calls him out for being a sore loser because Delane defeated him. However, this only infuriates Dalton more, so he insults Klein's mother, calling Klein an illegitimate brat. Pissed off, Klein turns around, exuding killing intent as he glances at Dalton, who is terrified by the expression on Klein's face. However, Klein was only giving Dalton the death glare because of the blatant disrespect, and not because Dalton insulted the mother he had never met. Klein is angry that Burkle's descendants have fallen to the point where insignificant trash can pick on them. He couldn't understand why the family of the hero who killed him had fallen to this extent. Fortunately, before Klein's anger can get out of hand, Dunkel steps in, warning Dalton to back off. Still fuming, Dalton decides to leave, but not before calling Klein a coward for using a knight to intimidate him. He then storms off like an annoyed cockerel, while Klein and Dunkel quietly watch from behind. After he leaves, Klein asks Dunkel for a spare sword, and later that night, Dunkel hands him the sword. He wonders why Klein needs a sword at such a late hour, but Klein ignores the question as he swings the sword around, mimicking Delane's movements from earlier. Dunkel guesses it must be the meteor sword, and Klein confirms it, after which he tells Dunkel to go ahead without him. Dunkel agrees, but not before advising Klein to be careful playing with a sword. As he prepares to leave, Dunkel reasons that Klein must be doing this because he has regrets about not learning swordsmanship. He believes that it's too late for Klein to grasp anything since he has no mana, and those who cannot use mana can never become knights. Apart from that, the meteor sword is a secret art, and no one has officially taught it to Klein, so even if Klein could replicate the sword path, Dunkel believes he can't copy it. Meanwhile, Klein focuses his senses to remember what he saw Delane doing earlier. For some reason he couldn't explain, the memory was vivid in his mind. As if the technique had been a part of him for a long time, Klein begins to replicate everything effortlessly, even the mana flow. Soon, the energy around him begins to crackle and reaches all the way to Dunkel, who is taken aback. Dunkel turns around, wondering whether Klein really replicated the technique, but before he can figure it out, Klein actually unleashes the powerful meteor sword technique. The resulting strike from the attack even splits a giant boulder, and Dunkel, who had witnessed the whole thing, is left speechless. Still in shock, Dunkel calls out Klein while Klein is very pleased that the technique actually worked. A few days later, Klein is thrown into yet another one of Garrison's tortures. All for the sake of purification, Klein's head was doused in a bucket of water and held down for a few minutes. Aaron and Garrison are surprised that Klein can hold his breath underwater for such a long time. While Klein is suffering, Garrison and Aaron discuss his ability to pass for a fish, and Garrison even decides to do the next purification ceremony in a fish tank. Unable to take it anymore, Klein yells at Garrison, scolding him for extending the purification time today. Garrison explains that it is because he felt a strange, ominous energy coming out of Klein's room earlier. However, this only infuriates Klein further as he can't believe he's been tortured because of a hunch. Just then, Dunkel arrives with an invitation for Klein from Dalton, who claims he wants to apologize for his disrespect on the training grounds. Remembering how crazy Dalton acted at the training grounds, Klein smells something fishy about the apology offer. He then reads the invitation and learns that it is a hunting contest, but Klein finds it suspicious that Dalton is inviting him over so soon after acting like a rabid dog earlier. Klein guesses that this must be a trap, but he still tells Dunkel that he will honor the invitation. He then glances at the sword, knowing that with his new sword skills, he can go there without worrying about being ambushed. After his success in replicating the meteor sword technique, Klein replayed it in his head countless times in the last few days. Thanks to this, he realized that he can perfectly mimic any technique he has seen just once. However, Klein cannot understand how he came to have this ability. Meanwhile, Dunkel quietly observes Klein for a while before agreeing to get the carriage ready to head to the hunting contest. Garrison also offers to tag along, but Klein immediately declines as he suspects that Garrison might be cooking up some scheme to torture him. However, Garrison refuses to back down and claims that he's got a bad feeling about today. Shortly after, they head to Dalton's estate, but Aaron falls asleep on Garrison's leg shortly after their departure. Klein is busy scolding Garrison for tagging along, but Garrison ignores his complaints and gives him a pillow for comfort. However, Klein turns it down, telling Garrison that the trip through the western forest is rough. Klein also lets Garrison know that he'll feel better after getting some sleep. Garrison is touched that Klein is so considerate, but Klein suddenly shatters his hope, saying he meant that the pillow should be given to Aaron. After emotionally damaging Garrison, Klein looks at the carriage window and notes that the forest has really changed a lot. Back in his time as Archimonde, this same place was covered with snow and corpses. However, 200 years later, that ice corpse field has become a lush forest. Klein guesses that all this change must be Burkle's doing. A few moments later, Dunkel informs Klein that they've arrived at the Conwell estate, Dalton's home. As soon as he steps out of the carriage, Klein is met with a magnificent castle, 100 times more lavish than even the Rhineland estate. To make matters worse, the guests were even enjoying a lavish feast for a mere young adult's hunting contest. While Klein is still scanning the place, Dalton arrives holding a bunch of large dogs and asks what Klein is staring at so intently. He then boasts about the estate, proudly letting Klein know that it was built from the money they scammed off the main line of the Rhineland family. While Dalton is busy mouthing off, Klein notices that the dogs in his care are severely malnourished. Fed up with the entire display of vanity, Klein asks why the hunting contest has suddenly turned into a social gathering. Sensing Klein's growing impatience, Dalton finally decides to begin the so-called hunt. With a smug grin, he releases the dogs, sending them charging into the forest. According to Dalton, bait has been scattered throughout the woods, giving the animals a scent to track. He then reveals that the dogs have been deliberately starved, claiming that their hunger sharpens their sense of smell far beyond that of any human. Once they catch the scent and begin pursuing the bait, he explains, the real hunt begins. Without warning, Dalton draws his bow, and before the dogs can get far, he fires several arrows, effortlessly bringing down a few of them. Pleased with himself, he boasts about the kills, presenting them as an example of what a successful hunt should look like. At that moment, Erin, who had been asleep in the carriage, wanders over while rubbing her eyes, still groggy from her nap. Dalton stops her midway and pats her head, calling her Klein's pet maid. He even remarks that he doesn't know why Klein carries around such a tiny dead weight. Just as he's about to get more handsy, Klein grabs Dalton's wrist and twists it, warning Dalton to back off. Klein glares at Dalton, threatening to break his hand, and after twisting it for a bit, he lets go. Furious, Dalton bumps into Klein, telling him to stop acting tough. He then mounts a horse and mischievously invites Klein to follow him for the hunt. Without hesitation, Klein also mounts another horse and tells Dunkel to stay back with Erin. Dunkel warns that it's dangerous for him to go alone and offers to follow him just in case of trouble. However, Klein refuses and tells Dunkel to stay behind to monitor Garrison. He explains that if Garrison suddenly disappears, it means that something's gone wrong. Klein then hands Dunkel a magic scroll, telling him to immediately rip it when Garrison disappears. Klein explains that once the scroll is torn, the linked crest will appear on the back of his hand. After dishing out the instructions, Klein rides off before Dunkel can protest, while Garrison quietly observes the whole thing from afar. Shortly after, Klein arrives in a clearing in the forest, still trying to find Dalton. Just as he's about to continue the search, Dalton calls out to him as if he's been waiting for this moment for a long time. Dalton is surrounded by dog corpses as he wickedly licks his sword like a predator who has just found its ultimate prey. Klein then gets off the horse and with a disgusted look on his face, questions what Dalton means. Klein's disgust increases when he scans the surroundings only to see that Dalton has eliminated all the dogs. Dalton then lets Klein know that he was waiting for the grand finale of the hunt. Pointing his sword forward, Dalton declares that Klein is the last prey and vows to kill him. However, Klein is not moved by the rant of a madman about to meet his end. But like every villain who talks way too much, Dalton begins to explain how he plans to take down Klein and present his head to Delane just to show that the Rhineland family is trash. As Dalton continues to mouth off his villain monologue, he raises his right hand, signaling the minions he arranged for this very moment. By the time the mercenaries get closer, Dalton is still on his precious villain monologue, talking about how it is time for the dukedom to go to the collateral branch. Before long, a bunch of archers aim at Klein, preparing to punch a few holes into him, but Klein remains calm as if staring down at pesky little ants. All this while, the never-ending villain rant continues as Dalton excitedly tells Klein that by tomorrow, the whole city will be rampant with news of the fallen swordsman of the Rhineland family who ended up as manure. After listening to all that garbage, Klein is furious as his mind wanders to Burkle and how he fought for this so-called trash to have a peaceful future. Klein then scoffs at poor Burkle's legacy, and soon he begins to laugh uncontrollably as if possessed. Dalton stares at Klein in confusion, unable to tell whether he has completely lost his mind or is simply too foolish to grasp the situation he's in. However, in that very moment, the prey becomes the predator as Klein suddenly embodies his former self, looking at Dalton with a cold, terrifying stare. That terrifying cold look in Klein's eyes sends a chill through the air, making Dalton tremble with fear. With coldness in his voice, Klein begins his own villain monologue, but his is straight to the point and sends a chill down the spine of his listeners. Klein tells Dalton that the Rhineland family was built upon the price of his death, yet a pest dares to mock it. Suddenly, the atmosphere around them begins to darken red, leaving Dalton wondering whether this is magic. However, he recalls that Klein doesn't have mana, so there's no way he can pull off this scene. As the energy around Klein thickens, he lets Dalton know that it isn't magic, but demonic energy. Soon, demonic energy begins to swirl around Klein, whipping up powerful gusts of wind that almost sweep Dalton and his minions away. As the dark aura intensifies, Klein's earlier words finally sink in, and Dalton vaguely recalls hearing something about demonic energy. Unfortunately, Klein has no intentions of stopping anytime soon, and with a calm, commanding voice, he begins chanting an ancient demonic incantation, calling upon ancient buried souls. Invoking his name, he orders them to feast and devour as he summons a bunch of undead skeletons. One of the guys about to be cooked is horrified at the sight in front of him, and a chilling thought creeps into his mind as he wonders if Klein could truly be Archimond. Before long, Klein is surrounded by a legion of shrieking skeletons as he continues the chant, telling them to devour until their resentment is satiated. After summoning his little league of undead, Klein begins to feel that familiar sensation he thought he had long forgotten. 200 years later, that feeling of standing in a corpse field now felt like something from a distant past. However, Klein could still feel that sensation echoing endlessly through the darkness and the voices of the dead calling out to him. Having that familiar sensation sweep through his body, Klein fully embraces it. Meanwhile, the side dude, who had now recognized the monstrosity in front of him, skeptically calls Klein Archimund. Klein wickedly responds, saying he used to be called by that name. However, some of the other mercenaries still doubt, since the story about Klein being Archimund was nothing more than a rumor. However, seeing the scary skeletons in front of them, they can't help but be skeptical that the rumors might actually be true. Meanwhile, Dalton watches the entire scene unfold in silence, as though his brain needs extra time to process what he's seeing. After a long, awkward pause, some of the mercenaries burst into laughter, mocking the grotesque skeletons for their bucket-shaped heads. A few even ridicule Klein, questioning why he bothered summoning such low-level trash. Klein can hardly believe his ears, as these were some of the very same skeletons he once used to nearly bring an entire continent to its knees, yet now they were being dismissed as worthless garbage. Dalton, finally snapping out of his daze, joins in the mockery, and with a smug grin he boasts that he has smashed hundreds of skeletons just like those during missions. However, one guy still manages to notice something a little off about Klein's skeletons, but Dalton confidently tells his men to take a bone from the skeletons as souvenirs. The mercenaries find this amusing and they decide to heed his advice. Dalton then orders the archers to take out the skeletons blocking their path while the other mercenaries break through. He then orders the archers to prepare, and immediately he tells them to fire. The archers release hundreds of arrows against Klein and his army of undead, but as the arrows close in, Klein remains calm as if they're just insignificant feathers flying towards him. The arrows finally hit Klein's camp, and Dalton is excited to see Klein's bloody remains, but the sight in front of him leaves him stunned. Once the dust settles, he realizes that the skeletons have impenetrable shields, and they use them to form a barrier, protecting Klein. Pleased with the effect, Klein scoffs at the fact that no one recognizes his special skeletons after 200 years. Meanwhile, the mercenaries are starting to feel uneasy because Klein's skeletons didn't have that shield a few moments ago. Klein then lets them know that his minions are not the typical spineless skeletons. When the mercs demand to know what they are, Klein simply says that his skeletons are different. But those words alone are enough to make the mercs tremble. As Klein prepares to show them what he is capable of, he silently tells Burkle to watch closely as he quietly revels in the thought that he is finally about to teach a lesson to the bastards who mocked and insulted the future Burkle fought so hard to protect. As he commands the skeletons to ready themselves for attack, Klein looks forward to crushing the so-called younger ones, the very people he was killed for, and with that thought in mind, he gives the order to charge. To everyone's shock, the skeletons surge forward at incredible speed. Watching them race across the battlefield, Dalton can only wonder how the hell skeletons are capable of running that fast. He then confidently orders his men to maintain their positions instead of panicking, since their opponents are nothing but skeletons. However, the next moment, Dalton's words prove to be false as the same skeletons begin mercilessly tearing through Dalton's men. As different parts are chopped off and blood splatters from all sides, Dalton begins to panic. His formation was already non-existent, and no one was listening to him anymore. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning, as Klein orders his second crossbow unit to surround the enemies and lock onto the target. The remaining mercenaries immediately look upwards when they hear a clacking sound, and at that very moment, their lives flash before their eyes. While they're still dazed, Klein orders the crossbow unit to be ready to take the shot. At that moment, the mercenaries inform the others about the impending attacks, but just as they're about to tell them to run, Klein orders the unit to fire. Soon, a barrage of arrows comes raining down on Dalton's camp, eliminating a bunch of them at once. Meanwhile, Dalton is still in the middle of the battlefield, trembling like a wet, cold puppy. He quickly scans the area and notices that he's badly losing, and Klein's skeletons aren't the cheap type from Temu. Knowing that it's only a matter of minutes before his gang is wiped out, Dalton decides to make a last-ditch effort. He orders his remaining team to stop reloading their crossbows and switch to close combat. After confirming they heard him the first time, Dalton prepares to lead by example and confidently rushes into the battle. With a single strike, he chops off the head of one of the skeletons and begins to celebrate too soon, excitedly telling his team to aim for the head. However, before he can finish that sentence, the headless skeleton almost takes off Dalton's head. Fortunately, Dalton manages to dodge the attack, after which he tries to figure out how the skeleton is still active without a head. Klein is amused as he mocks Dalton's knowledge of how the undead are supposed to die when they lose their head. Klein then reminds him again that his skeletons are different from that usual trash. To prove this, the headless skeleton soon locates its head, and the moment it puts the head back on, it immediately reattaches itself. This shocking ability is the main reason why, as Archimund, Klein almost succeeded in swallowing the continent. Meanwhile, Dalton is stunned that a skeleton can actually reattach its head. What he doesn't know is that these beings summoned by demonic energy do not die easily, and every single one of them obeys orders and utilizes tactical formations. Now, the mercenaries who previously looked down on them were beginning to panic because what they killed had clearly refused to stay dead. Klein knows he's letting them off easy because with this weak body, he can only summon 11. But since everyone has rested, Klein declares that it's time to continue where they left off. While their screams echo deep in the forest, all is at peace back at the Conwell estate. Aaron was listening to funny stories about Klein from Garrison, and he was happy to tell them. Watching Aaron, excited to hear about Klein, Garrison guesses she must be very fond of him. Aaron tells Garrison that she is and explains that it is because Klein is so amazing and kind. However, the dude she calls kind is busy making people scream and tremble while he wears a straight face. Aaron also says that Klein is gentle and shares his cookies with her as he's the warmest person in the world. However, the warmest person is seen coldly crushing everything in his way. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, Dalton is struggling to survive, and no matter how many times he chops off the heads of the skeletons, they somehow manage to keep regenerating. Dalton finally grows a brain as he begins to wonder how to stop them from regenerating, and just then his eyes lock on Klein, the source. Dalton figures he can end this nightmare by eliminating Klein, so from his position, Dalton swiftly leaps forward, hoping to strike Klein. But who the hell screams someone's name during a sneak attack? As the dumb villain leaps forward screaming for no useful reason, he proudly declares that he's about to end Klein's corpse games. And after a short villain declaration, Dalton prepares to take a swing at Klein, but Klein is unmoved, and he activates the special eye skill. As the energy around him begins to crackle, Klein pulls out a sword and begins to recall Delane's sword movements. With the power of his special eye, Klein can replicate any technique he has seen once by just recalling it. Dalton is shocked as it dawns on him that Klein is about to use the same exact technique as Delane. Unfortunately, just as he couldn't block Delane's strike, Dalton was also unable to go up against Klein's meteor sword. With one strike, Klein's sword slices through Dalton, leaving him stunned for a moment. As the fatal injury snuffs the life of Dalton, Klein tells him not to expect a peaceful death and declares that Dalton's judgment begins now. After eliminating Dalton, Klein reveals that Dalton's theory about eliminating the caster to make the Necromancer's creations lose their power was right. After all, as Archimund, Klein was defeated because he couldn't overcome that weakness. But by a twist of fate, Klein can now protect this same power thanks to the Rhineland ability. Basically, Klein has gotten stronger because of the blood of his enemy Burkle. Looking at the fading Dalton, Klein makes up his mind to change things now that he has been reborn into this new life. Dalton overhears this, but just as he's about to question Klein, Dalton breathes his last. Klein, on the other hand, strengthens his resolve to help Burkle rebuild the ruined house of Rhineland. Shortly afterwards, Dalton awakens in a pitch-black place, unable to make sense of his bearings or see anything. He tries to move, but realizes that he has been strapped tightly to a chair, unable to move no matter how much he struggles. Seconds later, Klein appears, looking like the same person from his past life, and tells Dalton that this is the place where souls arrive beyond the world of the living. He then introduces himself as Archimund, explaining that he created this afterlife zone. While Dalton tries to make sense of the gibberish, Klein reads out Dalton's charges like the devil judge. He reveals that while Dalton was alive, he starved and tortured dogs. Dalton also habitually committed abuse all in the name of hunting, and Klein remembers the joy on Dalton's face when he committed these atrocities. Meanwhile, Dalton is still confused about his situation and barks at Klein to explain instead of talking nonsense. He's about to threaten Klein when he suddenly stops mid-sentence as he recalls being cut down only a few minutes ago, but now he's perfectly fine. Seeing the confusion on Dalton's face, Klein lets him know that he's already dead. Klein explains that the purpose of this afterlife is to return one's karma, and Dalton is only here to receive the karma from his life. Dalton protests, refusing to accept he's dead, so he tells Klein to quit the jokes and simply let him go. Unfortunately, Klein doesn't care whether Dalton believes him or not as long as he pays for his sins. With demonic energy, Klein summons the souls of the dead dogs who angrily growl at Dalton while he trembles. As the dogs continue to growl viciously and more loudly, Klein tells Dalton to listen to the screams of the lives he killed. The dogs are immediately unleashed on him, and Klein reminds Dalton that this is the hell he built for himself. The dogs immediately pounce on Dalton while he screams helplessly, begging and crying. Back in the real world, tears are also streaming down Dalton's dead eyes, even though he's just a corpse. Klein watches him quietly for a while before turning his attention to the undead army that helped him achieve this victory. Since they answered his call, he decides to return the favor for helping him. Klein swipes his hand in the air to release the undead, and as a reward for their help, he breaks the curse that bound them and grants them freedom. After releasing them from the curse, the skeletons start dissipating until they vanish completely without a trace. Watching the dust disappear, Klein feels a bit at a loss as he can't understand why he's alive. Since death is when bones crumble and scatter with the wind, Klein couldn't understand the purpose of his reincarnation. Klein is having a midlife crisis when a cloaked figure suddenly appears, calling Klein a necromancer and referring to him by his actual title as the second son of Rhineland. Klein figures the uninvited guest must have been watching everything from the shadows, so he calmly asks the cloaked man to reveal his identity. The stranger refuses, and instead he begins pouring demonic energy into the corpses scattered across the ground. With a smug grin, he declares that Klein will never live long enough to learn who he is. As Klein watches, the demonic energy seeps into the bodies, and one by one, the corpses reanimate and rise as the undead. Klein quickly recognizes that the man is using soul return magic to control the dead, which means he is a necromancer. The cloaked man then remarks that although Dalton failed, the corpses should still prove useful. After saying that, he lets out the usual kind of laugh for every weak, disposable villain. Back at the Conwell estate, Dunkel is worrying about Klein when Aaron approaches to tell him all the stories she heard from Garrison. But Dunkel is not in the mood for small talk as he continues to think of Klein while staring at the magic scroll. He wonders why Klein would take an emergency magic scroll, and what worries him more is that it's already been 3 hours since Klein entered the forest, yet there's still no news about him. Dunkel finds this suspicious, and the whole thing was already giving him a bad vibe. Unable to stay still anymore, Dunkel prepares to head out to search for Klein, but a couple of grunts try to stop him. They remind him that leaving his post might cause problems, and the hunting contest is still in progress, so he should hold on a bit longer. As Dunkel quietly observes the grunts, he notices they're wearing the Conwell family crest on their uniforms, making him realize they're Dalton's lackeys. This immediately sets off all the alarms in Dunkel's brain, so he decides to intimidate them, reminding them of his position as the knight commander of the main line. He also threatens to teach them a lesson if they keep blocking his path, and with one terrifying glare, the grunts freeze on the spot, scared out of their minds. A few minutes later, Aaron calls out to Dunkel, asking if something's wrong, but Dunkel simply lets her know that he's going out to find Klein. He then tells Aaron to head back to the family estate with Garrison, but Aaron reveals that Garrison has already left. Dunkel is surprised to hear this and wonders when Garrison slipped away. Aaron then tells Dunkel that the priest had a serious expression on his face before leaving. Dunkel immediately recalls that Klein told him to tear the magic scroll if the priest suddenly vanished. Dunkel hurriedly mounts his horse, noting that Klein's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. He then rips the magic scroll apart with his teeth, and fearing that something is definitely happening to Klein, Dunkel swiftly rides off. Back in the forest, Klein and the Necromancer are still having a stare-off, but Klein is more concerned that the last fight already drained all his demonic energy, so he can't use necromancy. Looking at the crazy situation in front of him, Klein notes that his body will not last long against another fight. Meanwhile, as soon as the Necromancer orders his minions to attack and eliminate Klein, the slowest undead in zombie history advance towards Klein, growling. Despite being at a disadvantage, Klein remains unbothered as he taunts the Necromancer for trying to eliminate him using such mid-soul return magic skill. Just then, the back of Klein's hand begins to glow, signaling that the magic scroll has been ripped. The undead soon draw nearer, growling and raising their weapon to strike him, but with a mischievous grin, Klein tells the Necromancer that he's totally screwed. Just then, a purple light bursts from the crest on the back of Klein's hand while the Necromancer is utterly confused by what Klein means. Before he can even figure out what is going on, a bright golden light appears as Garrison jumps in front of Klein, taking out some of the zombies with holy light. Garrison then begins to chant holy spells while purifying the undead in his path with holy light. After taking them down, Garrison urges Klein to relax, and at the same time the Necromancer is still frozen in shock by what he just witnessed. Looking at Garrison, the Necromancer immediately recognizes him as the famous Holy Agent. Meanwhile, Garrison towers with confidence, surrounded by bright golden light, comforting Klein to rest easy since a powerhouse like him is here. Speaking about Garrison being called the Agent, there are 3 human weapons who carry out the Pope's orders with absolute obedience. These 3 are the Church's strongest assets, and they're the only ones capable of wielding the holy relic left behind by St. Gall. It is said each one of these agents possesses the power of an entire fortress, and among them, the one who boasts the greatest raw strength is none other than Garrison. As more of the undead continue to attack, Garrison effortlessly crushes them with his fist while chanting a prayer to purify the undead. Garrison breezes through the horde easily, taking a few heads without breaking a sweat, making it clear that this dude needed to be in a remake of The Walking Dead. While Garrison is exerting what he calls judgment, the main sinner who started the whole saga in the first place watches in shock. He begins to question every single decision that brought him here, and seems to understand why an agent of the Church would be involved in this simple mess. The dude is even more shocked by Garrison's insane power, so he decides to make a run for it, knowing he messed with the wrong dude. As Garrison heads towards him to purify the source, the masked dude tries to bolt, since facing a monster wasn't part of the job he was paid to do. Unfortunately, before he can take a few steps, he is pulled off the ground like trash as Garrison grabs him by his head. While flailing midair, the dude's mask falls off, and he tries to plead for his pathetic life, but Garrison begins to crush every bone in the guy's face like pudding. While the masked dude struggles to breathe, Garrison ignores all his protests and decides to finish his prayer. Before the prayer ends, the dude's eyes are already almost popping out of the sockets, and as Garrison finishes reciting the prayer, he effortlessly crushes the guy's head. His eyeball even bounces off all the way to Klein's feet. Once Garrison is done, he calls out to Klein, who is so uneasy after witnessing Garrison's terrifying strength. Garrison barely took a step and merely charged forward, yet by the sheer pressure of his aura, over 20 corpses were shredded into pieces on the spot. Klein is uneasy as Garrison approaches him with bloodied hands, and as the blood drips on Klein's hair, Klein is terrified, thinking he's the next cabbage to be shredded. Garrison then says he rushed over after sensing a trace of necromancy coming from the forest. He grins eerily, telling Klein that there seems to be something he can't quite understand. Garrison then places his hand on Klein's shoulder, saying the demonic energy he felt earlier is different from the one on the masked dude. At that very moment, Klein's heart drops, and seeing the expression on Garrison's face, Klein is certain that the priest is ready to erase him here if he slips up. Fortunately, Dunkel arrives just in the nick of time, asking if Klein is alright. As Klein turns around to see Dunkel, he has never been so relieved to see another person in his short life. As relief washes through his body, Klein begins to feel lightheaded and guesses it must be because using necromancy was too much for his weak body. Klein then slumps to the ground, causing Dunkel to panic as he rushes to Klein's side to check on him. Like a worried mom, Dunkel frantically questions what happened to Klein and why he's covered in blood, even though the blood is only a few drops from Garrison's hand. Klein ignores the million questions and tells Dunkel to stop screaming into his ears and just hold him because his legs are about to give out. Dunkel then asks him about Dalton, and Klein simply replies that he eliminated him because Dalton tried to kill him first. A few days later, Dalton's father, Delkin, the Count of the Conwell family, calls for a meeting to demand justice for his dead son. He refuses to accept that Dalton tried to assassinate Klein and argues that his son was a knight with honor and loyalty. Delkin angrily tells the Rhinelands not to frame Dalton for assassination and demands that they search for the real culprit instead. But Heinkel presents proof of the investigation into the incident, showing that Klein has not changed his story even after intense interrogation. Heinkel also presents a record of about 20 mercenaries being dispatched from the Conwell estate at the same time Dalton and Klein disappeared. From this evidence, Heinkel believes that Dalton was indeed up to something shady against Klein. This damning evidence catches Delkin off guard, making him unable to argue any further. He curses the mercenaries under his breath for leaving evidence after he told them to be extremely careful. Seeing that he has been backed into a corner, Delkin decides to change the topic by arguing that the whole incident makes no sense, especially the part about Klein eliminating Dalton. Since Dalton was already skilled enough to join the Knights, Delkin refuses to believe that Klein, who has never wielded a sword, could take him down. Delkin's point makes sense to the council as they recall seeing Klein at the swordsmanship demonstration, and they even heard Heinkel saying that Klein has no mana. The council begins to question how a boy with no mana could have killed a skilled swordsman, and this plays right into Delkin's plan. Even though Dalton failed to eliminate Klein, Delkin plans to bury this secret, fearing that he will also join his ancestors if it is revealed that they tried to assassinate a direct descendant. To come out of this unscathed, Delkin decides to change tactics again by attacking Klein's mother. He reminds the council that Klein's mother, Claire, was surrounded by strange rumors until her death, and Klein also claimed to be Archimond when he was young. Delkin argues that they cannot take Klein's word and frame Dalton as an assassin. Infuriated, Heinkel orders Delkin to watch his mouth, but Delkin continues to milk this point and accuses Klein of hiring someone to eliminate Dalton. He then expresses disgust that Klein is the one at fault, but he's trying to pin the crime on Dalton. Suddenly, a voice thundered in the hall, commanding Delkin to stop cooking lies. Delkin turns around to see who dares speak to him that way, only to see Klein confidently strutting into the hall. Klein reveals that he has been listening to the whole deliberation and could no longer stand Delkin spouting nonsense. He then tells the council that Dalton hired mercenaries to assassinate him, so he simply acted in self-defense by taking Dalton out. Klein further claims that a mysterious figure transformed Dalton and his followers into the undead, and that Garrison arrived just in time to eliminate them. After hearing Klein's brief account, Delkin immediately accuses him of lying. Klein simply smirks and counters by asking Delkin whether his accusation that Klein is Archimond is more believable. Seeing that his plan has backfired, Delkin immediately grits his teeth and shuts up. However, all this was part of the resolve Klein made after eliminating Dalton. He swore to restore the Rhineland family that was built upon his death with his own hands. Klein refuses to let Berkel's legacy be defiled by these leeches who call themselves descendants, and the beginning of Klein's plan is to put the collateral branches in their place. A few moments later, someone knocks on the door, and the pretty girl who was at the last meeting enters, apologizing for being late. She's immediately announced at the door as Lya Paulweavern, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. Klein wonders what she's doing here, and he recalls that Lya was also at the swordsmanship demonstration. Delkin then tells Lya that she shouldn't be here since the matter has nothing to do with the Paulweavern family, but Heinkel reveals that he invited Lya to participate in the gathering. Since Dalton had previously participated in missions under her knight order, Heinkel believes she has every right to attend this meeting. As soon as Laya takes off her jacket, her eyes glance towards Klein's direction, and their eyes meet. She then waves to him, asking if they can talk in private. Klein is puzzled by the sudden invitation and wonders why Laya wants to speak with him in private. Klein is displeased when Heinkel grants Laya permission to speak with him in private without consulting him first. To make matters worse, Heinkel tells him not to take too long. The entire situation irritates Klein, especially since he has never been fond of knights. However, after giving it some thought, he realizes this could actually work to his advantage. Klein concludes that there are only 3 reasons Laya would want a private conversation with him, and that is verification, suspicion, or some kind of test. Regardless of her intentions, he is prepared for whatever she throws his way. With that, he excuses himself and follows Laya, feeling like a lamb being led to the slaughter. Even so, Klein has no intention of backing down, and he no longer wants to run from problems, especially now that he has a clear goal. In fact, he has already resolved to use everyone around him to further his ambitions, no matter who they are. A few minutes later, the pair enters a side room, and the moment the door closes behind them, Laya suddenly pins Klein against the wall in a rather questionable manner. As if that were not shocking enough, she immediately asks if she can touch him. Klein is caught completely off guard, as if the sudden wall pinning isn't startling enough on its own, but Laya's bizarre request leaves him even more unsettled. Talking about Laya, she is the eldest daughter of the Paulwyvern family, which is one of the 3 great ducal houses alongside the Rhineland family, and she is good with the spear. Thanks to this, she has been made the captain of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. Because of how talented she is, she has a whole load of records to back it up. She had once wiped out a whole horde of monsters single-handedly while protecting civilians at the same time. She sounds so tough as she orders Klein to follow her quickly, but in Klein's defense, he tells her that he is obviously right behind her. Laya then tells Klein not to think that they are family because they are nowhere close. Previously, Klein's father had told him that his aunt was the second wife of the Duke of Paulwyvern, which makes Laya his cousin. This is what Klein heard from his father, but it appears that Laya is the daughter of the first wife, so they share no bond, which means they are total strangers. Just then, Laya tells Klein that she has something personal to check out. And this is when Laya pushes him to the wall. She gets closer with her cute lips, asking our guy if she can touch him. 1,000 questions run through Klein's head when he hears this, as he wonders what Laya's plan is. Klein tries to understand her, but she grabs his arm to investigate. She starts pressing his body to check out the texture of his skin. She confirms that there is no single scar or blister on his hands, and she compares Klein's hands to a baby's. Laya admits that master swordsmen don't have calluses on their hands, but at least there are specific areas that get tough. After she is done with her inspection, she looks Klein dead in the face and lets him know that she can clearly see that he has never touched a sword before, because his hands show no trace of swordsmanship whatsoever. With this, Laya expresses her confusion about how he is able to defeat Dalton, a trained knight alongside 20 mercenaries too. Just then, Laya jumps to the big question, asking Klein if he is hiding another power, but Klein pushes her away. Klein scoffs while asking Laya if she is suggesting that he is Archimond. From their short interaction, Klein could already see how dangerous Laya is because she is not just curious, but she is actively looking for a reaction, not an answer. With his current stance, silence is going to be an admission, while any attempt to hesitate will only confirm her suspicion. With this, Klein realizes that the only way out is to be more aggressive and confident than her. Klein speaks up with confidence, asking Laya what the issue is if he is really Archimond, but before he can finish his statement, Laya laughs at him. Laya calls him a little brat who can never be Archimond, and Laya's words ultimately shatter Klein emotionally. He opens his mouth in shock before asking Laya if she just called him a brat, and Laya confirms this before adding more salt to his injury. Laya explicitly tells him that he is far too small to be Archimond because his proportions are all wrong, and his voice, alongside his build, is suffering from a deficit aura. In her conclusion, she lets Klein know that he is nothing but a brat, and a little one at that. Klein ultimately loses his speech thanks to the overwhelming emotional damage, and he drops his head in shame. Laya tells Klein that he is not Archimond, and he also can't use a sword, so she wonders how someone as trash as him is able to beat a knight. Just then, Laya tells Klein that she is going to give him a kiss, but he is too damaged upstairs to even understand what she is saying. He asks her if she is trying to bribe him or something, but Laya suggests that they head back in because they are going to be late. Moments later, Klein and Laya return to the council room, and deep down, Klein makes a self-admission that he is just the useless second son who was stuck in a monastery for 7 years. He understands why they are not going to believe him if he says he killed Dalton in self-defense. The Duke is still asking Laya what they talked about when Klein suddenly gets everyone's attention by stomping his sword into the floor. Once he has everyone's attention, he points his sword at Dalton's father, Delkin, telling him that he would like them to settle the issue the northern way. Klein shocks everyone when he demands a trial by combat, and this immediately gets the whole room talking. Apparently, it is an ancient northern judicial tradition that is used when a dispute cannot be easily resolved. Basically, there are no limits on weapons or techniques that can be used, and the outcome of the duel turns out to be the final verdict. It is basically a case of where two sides fight it out, and the winner becomes the right one. Delkin expresses his shock, and he starts asking Klein why he would pick something like this, but Klein lets him know that there are 100 reasons to. Klein reminds Delkin that despite evidence that his son attempted to kill him first, he still wanted to frame. As if this is not enough, he also insulted him and his mother in the process, but deep down, Klein knows he has no affection for the mother he is talking about, since his real identity is actually Archimond. Delkin starts stuttering, and Klein urges him to be quick with his decision, so as not to keep the nobles waiting. Delkin looks around and he realizes that the nobles are already excited about the idea of a trial by combat. Klein's father also jumps in, telling everyone that it is going to be a guarantee that the duel's outcome shall be final. He declares all previous evidence null and void, and the moment Delkin hears this, he realizes that he can use this to his advantage. He asks Klein if he is really sure about his decision because he has no mana, and when he gets no counter-response from Klein, Delkin mentions that he would like to choose a knight to fight for him. Delkin is already dreaming about how he is going to kill Klein, but unknown to him, Klein has the same plan for him. Once the two have agreed to the duel, the Duke declares that it will take place in 4 days. Unknown to them, Klein didn't just escalate the situation for nothing because this is just the beginning of what he wants to do. He plans to use Delkin as the stepping stone to show the other branch families his plan to tear down and rebuild the family. When Delane later heard of Klein's decision to take the trial by combat route, he scolds him for taking such a drastic and dangerous route. He asks Klein if he knows how dangerous it is, and Klein assures him that he is aware of the risks. Klein urges his brother to just accept it as it is because their father already did. Delane is so worried that he even suggests being Klein's champion in the trial, but Klein refuses. Klein tells Delane that there is still only one reason why they retain power, even though the branch families are always trying to get them off. It is because of a simple reason, and this is because their father is the strongest swordsman, while Delane is his successor. Klein urges his brother to look at the bigger picture before offering to stand in for him in the fight. He lets Delane know that this is just going to give the branch families the opportunity to kill the heir of Rhineland. Deep down, Klein knows that the situation must be tough for his brother, but Klein knows that he has no choice but to do this to salvage his reputation. Delane then tells his brother how happy he was the first day Klein was born because he had always wanted a little brother. Even though they had different mothers, Delane didn't care about this. In the end, he lost his brother to the monastery, and just after he returns, he is involved in a trial by combat that might lead to his death. With tears in his eyes, Delane grabs Klein, and Delane's reaction shocks Klein to his bones. Before Delane gets to say what is on his mind, Dunkel enters the room to tell them that Delkin has picked his champion, and he is Rendel, an excommunicated knight from the Empire who proved his worth in battle. Basically, the reason he was excommunicated was his insatiable desire to kill. The scene shifts to a tavern where Rendel, a Goliath-sized man, is seen drinking while surrounded by corpses of people he's beaten to death just for the fun of it. Rendel expresses his excitement to be going up against a young boy because he really wants to hear Klein's agonizing cry when he tears him apart. On the day of the duel, Dunkel gives Klein the sword that he had him prepare. It is a sword that shatters once it hits a sword infused with mana, and Klein appears to be pleased with the sword. Klein confidently steps into the arena, and the people present in the arena are surprised that he has shown up. Even Delkin is sitting in the executive area alongside Heinkel, and he expresses his surprise that Klein decided to participate in the fight personally. He asks Heinkel with a mocking tone if his son is going to be fine because Randall is a great warrior from the Empire. Delkin tells Heinkel that he should have sent out Delane instead, but Heinkel keeps his mouth shut instead of engaging him in his useless talks. In the arena, Klein is wondering where his opponent is, and just then, he feels someone touch his shoulder from behind. It turns out to be the towering Randell, and he grabs Klein, saying he is excited to know what sound he will make when his neck snaps. In reaction to the dude suddenly touching him from behind, Klein leaps away from him, and the spectators are shocked to see Klein running away from his opponent. Delkan capitalizes on this, telling Heinkel that there is no way Klein will be able to handle the duel because he is already running even before it starts. Even Randell taunts Klein for being terrified when the fight has not officially begun, but little do they know that Klein is not actually scared. He was only startled, and this is thanks to the trauma of how Garrison grabbed his shoulder the last time. Meanwhile, Laia is also there to watch the fight against her stepmother, Hellion's wishes. Laia tells her assistant knight that she doesn't care what Hellion thinks because she is not her mother. She then adds that there are things she has to confirm with her own eyes. Klein also remembers Laia telling him that she is going to kiss him if he defeats a knight, and he almost retches in reaction to this. Klein warns Randell not to touch him again, but he still did, and Klein doesn't hold back in throwing a jab at him, telling him that he is so ugly, which is why the Empire abandoned him. This cuts deep into Randell's soul, but he tries to act tough, and he tells Klein that since he has a foul mouth, it makes it all better. Realizing that Randell is not going to let go of his coat, Klein starts undoing his coat button. Just then, Randall punches where Klein is standing with so much strength that it caves in. However, when everything clears off, Randall realizes that he is only holding Klein's coat. The spectators, on the other hand, are left raving because of how powerful Randall is. When the dust finally clears off, they see Klein standing in the distance, well away from Randall. From their first encounter, Klein already figures out that a direct confrontation with Randall is a no-no. If he even attempts to parry his attack, he will be the one to be crushed instead. And with this, Klein realizes that he cannot afford to joke around with the match. Those who are watching admit that Klein dodged Randall's attack so well, but the problem is how he is supposed to win against a giant monster like Randall. Delane can hear the people talking about how Klein will die in the fight, and this scares him. Randall makes another move by lunging toward Klein, but Klein dodges the punch before pulling out his sword from the sheath. He aims at Randall's neck, but Randall easily grabs him like a piece of Lego and swings him in the opposite direction. Klein maintains his aura by landing on the sword and maintaining his balance. Before he even gets the chance to rest, Randall dashes at him, swinging his sword at him. Klein manages to block the attack, and Randall teases him, telling him that he can't win just by running around. Randall mocks Klein, telling him to use his necromancy power, asking him if he is not the great Archimond. Klein hears this, and the anger causes his demonic energy to leak out. Randall feels the aura, and he leaps backward in fear. Even those who are watching wonder why Randall suddenly jumped backward, but they are so deluded by the fact that Randall is only taking it easy on Klein. Randall, on the other hand, knows he could feel an ominous aura like Archimond's swelling all around Klein. Delkin panics when he sees his champion acting all strange, and just then, Klein assures Randall that he doesn't have to worry because he is not going to use necromancy on him. Since he is a Rhineland, Klein knows that the arena is a place for him to prove himself through the sword alone, so he is obviously not going to use necromancy. The crowd starts cheering for Klein, roaring his name, thus turning the atmosphere around. Delkin's confidence vanishes, and he finds it hard to sit down comfortably again. Back in the arena, Randall doesn't want to accept what he saw, and he concludes that it is nothing more than a coincidence, because he is several levels ahead in both stamina and strength. In addition to this, he knows that Klein has no aura, and he decides to tap into his knowledge of Imperial swordsmanship, whose strength lies in its unrestrained use of mana. This is a skill that heightens one's breathing, muscles, and even the blood flow, thus pushing every sense to the limit. With aura overflowing in and around his body, Randall dashes toward Klein with the intention of taking him down before he can react. However, Klein still manages to dodge this, and he starts following Randall's paths to observe his technique and mana capacity. His eyes turn purple as he observes all of Randall's sword paths, and moments later, Randall gets really mad that he hasn't been able to cut Klein. He unleashes a massive aura imbued in his sword and tries to smash Klein to oblivion. The sword hits and delivers a massive blow to the ground, but when the smoke clears, he realizes that Klein has vanished. Randall starts getting worried because this can only have happened if Klein was able to read his sword path in such a short amount of time. Suddenly, Klein appears behind him with his sword perfectly aimed at him since he is completely wide open. Using the meteor sword technique, Klein delivers a powerful cut that slices through Randall's back. Everyone watching, including Delane, recognizes the sword technique, and Klein being able to use the technique shocks them to their bones. Randall screams out in pain while wondering how Klein is able to do this without mana. Laya, who is fully focused on the fight, turns red like a tomato when she sees this in complete disbelief. Before the fight, Heinkel had expressed his regrets to Dunkel in his office. He regrets the fact that he can't do anything about the situation because if he intervenes, the family's honor will only get worse. However, he was worried because Klein's opponent is a seasoned warrior, whom he definitely stands no chance against. Dunkel asked him why he allowed the duel to stand when he knew that Klein had no chance. Heinkel says Klein stood up for his late mother, and Heinkel hates himself for not being able to save him when he was branded as Archimond and locked away in the monastery. Because of this, Heinkel doesn't think he has any right to stop him as it is, and Heinkel scolds himself for being so incompetent. However, Dunkel urges the man not to worry himself because Klein never picks a fight he knows he can't win. Now that the Duke is seeing his son fight firsthand, he is left in complete shock because Dunkel was right about him. Talking about the Rhinelands, they had minimized their mana consumption to the barest minimum to help survive the freezing snowfields where they live. The Imperial swordsmanship that Randall uses can be compared to predation, which overwhelms the opponent by pouring in mana all at once, but Rhineland's technique is based on moderation. They target the opponent's gaps with minimal mana, so they basically produce impressive swordsmanship for maximum efficiency with minimum mana. This is exactly why Klein is able to use the family's technique without having any mana. Even though the power is lacking, Klein assures Randall that it is enough to take down trash like him. Klein's words only make Randall angrier, and he lets his aura go berserk. There is so much aura overflowing from his body that everyone in the arena is left shivering. Delkin sighs in relief because Randall has just used his ultimate technique, which is a mana explosion that instantly seals the opponent's movements. With his mana going rogue in the shape of a lion, Randell lunges at Klein with the aim of cutting him down. Delane fears for his brother's safety as the giant dude rushes at him. He screams at Klein to watch out, but Klein doesn't even make a move. Just as Randell's sword is about to hit him, Klein puts up his sword to block the attack. Because he had requested this sword specifically, it shatters. Randell sees this, and he laughs at Klein, but he suddenly sees Klein leaping toward him with a smile on his face. Klein smiles at him while telling him that the weapon to finish him off is finally complete. Just like a large eagle in the sky, Klein can sense his supposed lion getting overshadowed by Klein's technique. Before he realizes it, Klein's short sword slices through his right arm, cutting his arm off while still holding onto his sword. His hand flies off with blood trailing it, and the moment the hand lands on the ground, Heinkel stops the fight. He concludes that the duel is over, and the spectators are all left with their jaws on the ground. Even though the family's swordsmanship can be used with minimal mana, Dunkel is still impressed that Klein was able to execute everything with precision and to perfection. In addition to this, Dunkel realizes that Klein intentionally lured Randell into breaking his sword just to land a strike at close range. Even though they don't want to believe it, Dunkel knows that no one can disagree that it is a total victory for Klein. Randell grabs his arm in pain as blood gushes out and he screams in agony. He crashes to the ground like a kid, rolling around like he was stung by a bee. Medical staff rushes into the arena to cast healing magic on Randall's bleeding arm, and Klein asks them if the severed hand can be reattached. The healers tell him that it is impossible, so they will have to make him a prosthetic arm later. Klein is disappointed when he hears this because even after 200 years, healing magic still hasn't grown. Just then, Klein's father walks up to him, asking him how he is able to stand unfazed even after seeing a severed arm. This is when it dawns on Klein that he is actually supposed to act all scared, since he is no longer Archimund. He wonders if he should pretend to be scared when Delkin walks into the arena to voice his discontent. He claims that it is impossible for Randall to have lost to Klein while talking about the enormous sum that he paid Randell. Heinkel turns to Delkin, telling him that following their agreement, he has to admit his fault and fulfill the winner's demands. However, Delkin refuses, saying he lost his son and personal knight, and he is still ranting when he suddenly gets the sensation of his head flying off his shoulder. He hears an ominous voice in his head and he crashes to the ground in fear. Klein whispers in his ears, commanding him to confess his sins to Heinkel and beg for forgiveness on his knees. Klein orders Delkin to bow and beg for mercy, and after this, he is going to be crushed by the weight of his sins forever. All Delkin can see and hear is Archimund's overwhelming aura crippling him, and he quickly bursts into tears. He bows his head, admitting that he was wrong while confessing that he tried to kill Klein. It turns out that Klein was able to get Delkin to do this because he is using the voice of the dead, which is originally meant to summon the souls of the deceased. However, this voice induces an incomparable terror in a living person's body. Delkin continues begging for forgiveness while confessing all the wrongs he's done, and this is because he is losing his mind, thanks to what Klein did to him. The other branch families are left in total disbelief because their leader is literally crashing like he is nothing. With Delkin confessing his sins, Klein decides to use this as an opportunity. He wants to use this to announce his presence and set the family in order. Klein calls on everyone to get their attention, and he lets them know that he is the son of Grand Duchess Claire Rodelices and the second son of the strongest knight, Heinkel Rhineland. He basically announces his name to everyone present in the arena so that they can get familiar with the new changes that are about to take place in the family. Meanwhile, Garrison is seen barging into a temple where a cardinal named Morlock is praying. Garrison tells Morlock that the target he is observing was attacked by a necromancer. Just then, Morlock tells him that he doesn't have to worry about this because it is all part of the plan, as the man was sent through the Holy Order's cooperation with the Empire. Morlock mentions that necromancers are beings that incite pure terror. Basically, everyone gets scared when necromancers show up, and in the end, it will push them to turn to God. Morlock says thanks to this, many people will turn back to the Holy Order, and he is still spewing his trash when Garrison grabs him by the neck. Garrison is completely pissed at the fact that a servant of the Holy Temple has fallen for political games and compromised with evil. He tightens his grip on Morlock's neck until he crushes his head. Just then, a man in white, Palamon L., who is the Archbishop of the Holy Order, steps into the temple. He walks through the corpses of priests whom Garrison has killed on his way in, and he taunts him, saying he has killed more priests than necromancers. Garrison turns to Palamon in anger, asking him if everything that he just found is his doing, and Palamon denies this. However, he mentions that he gave his permission, and he tells Garrison that he brought some information for him. He's in the middle of his statement when Garrison dashes toward him with a punch meant to tear his head off. But Palamon vanishes before Garrison can even reach him. Palamon reappears behind Garrison, and he calmly continues with his statement, telling Garrison that necromancy usually leaves a trace behind. Palamon whips out a cross, which he claims contains the said traces, and it belonged to the necromancer that Garrison killed. He mentions that one trace is reanimation, which is the art of raising corpses that the Empire is hell-bent on perfecting. The other trace is a formula similar to the archetype of necromancy that deals with souls rather than bodies. He gets Garrison's attention when he mentions the archetype of necromancy. Palamon mentions that this is proof that there were 2 necromancers at the scene. Palamon then hits the nail on the head, telling Garrison that the target he is monitoring is a necromancer. 7 days after the trial, Klein thought that by announcing himself after the trial, everyone would finally get to recognize him, but it appears that the body of the 15-year-old that he is currently stuck with can't keep up. While he is busy in his chambers reading books, Erin is there playing with a doll and munching on her favorite cookies. Frustrated, Klein tells her to go to her room to play by herself, but Erin claims the dude is also playing. Klein scolds her, asking her if she can't see what he is currently reading, but Erin claims that it is a novel, which is the same thing as playing. Klein decides not to argue with her again because she is right. The cover of the book he is reading might look like a common novel, but the inside is filled with his secret notes on anatomy, magic circuits, and spell formations. Basically, the book is all about necromancy, and Klein has his reasons for reading. With his current body, he can only summon 11 skeletons at best, and even though his control is stable, he lacks the numbers for a war of endurance, so he has to do more research. However, he has one problem, and this is Garrison, who is hell-bent on wiping out any and every trace of Necromancer. Klein knows that Garrison already suspects him, so he has to find a way to regain his original power before he comes looking for him. However, he is left wondering how he is supposed to do this without getting caught by the others at the estate. Later on, Klein is summoned to his father's office, and his father tells him that they have received reports of undead sightings near the mine. Klein doesn't waste time before accepting to go on the mission to investigate because real combat is essentially the best form of research. Heinkel expresses his worries because there were reports of casualties, but he assures his father that he has nothing to worry about. It turns out that after the trial, his father has finally acknowledged him, and since it is an undead case, Klein wants to see if it is related to the ones who attacked him before. Klein considers this an opportunity to use necromancy as much as he wants because he is going to be alone. However, his plan gets totally ruined because Heinkel ordered Dunkel to accompany him on the mission. While they are camping out for the night, Klein makes a meal for them and the meat looks pretty sumptuous. It turns out that the role of cooking and hunting has completely fallen to Klein because Dunkel, who is a knight commander, is pretty useless in these aspects. Dunkel is overwhelmed with guilt that he is useless when it comes to areas like this, but Klein urges him to just eat his dish, assuring him that he is going to grill some more meat in a bit. Klein is not even moved by something of this kind because he spent years running from night orders. Moments later, Dunkel talks about what is bothering him, and he tells Klein that whenever he looks at him, he feels like he is completely different from others of his age. Dunkel mentions that with everything he has seen Klein do, it sometimes makes him think he might actually be the reincarnation of Archimond. Klein quickly cuts in, telling Dunkel never to mention something like this in Garrison's presence, and Dunkel assures him that he will never try since he knows the trauma Klein has gone through in Garrison's hands. Dunkel then continues by saying Archimond was a devil who turned millions of Northerners into undead. Dunkel suddenly feels a change in the atmosphere, and he thinks it is the wind, but Klein speaks up with a stern voice, telling Dunkel to never speak of such a subject again. Dunkel is shocked by the seriousness in his voice and the scary aura that is radiating from his body. Just then, they hear screams coming from the village, and the two run over to investigate, only to find the villagers being chased down by a group of undead. Dunkel jumps in to cut down the undead with a single slash. He misses one of them, and he turns around in fear that it would have overpowered Klein, but to his surprise, Klein had handled it. Klein then tells him to stop worrying about him and save the villagers instead. Dunkel acknowledges the order and continues cutting down the undead till there are none left. After they are done, the villagers thank them, and they ask them who they are. Dunkel then tells the villagers that standing before them is the second son of the Duke. Dunkel then asks them when the undead start appearing, and while he is interrogating the villagers, Klein is investigating the undead. He figures out that the undead is a form of reanimation magic that is used to revive and control corpses. Basically, it is the same technique that was used by the necromancer who attacked him in the forest. One of the villagers mentioned that the undead started appearing about 2 months ago, which was right after the Count's family restricted access to the mine. He reveals that it was around this time that people started disappearing too. To make it worse, all the undead that they just defeated are residents of their village, and Klein is stunned when he hears this. Out of nowhere, one of the villagers grabs Klein, asking him if he is truly a Rhineland. Klein stays mute because he doesn't understand what is going on with the dude, and he continues shaking Klein vigorously, telling him to answer the question. Dunkel jumps in to pull the dude away, and the dude screams out in agony, saying they have requested help for 2 months, but they didn't get a single response. He is pissed that they are just showing up and still have the guts to ask when the whole issue started. He mentions that the person that Klein just killed was his father, and all his father did was work day and night in the mine, only to be turned into an undead. The dude screams in tears, asking Klein why they are the ones who have to suffer in such a way. His tears and desperation hit Klein really hard, and to make it worse, Klein hears the voice of the undead speaking to him. Klein yells at the complaining dude, telling him to shut his mouth and not blame him for what happened to his father and the rest of the victims because he wasn't the one who turned them into the undead. While Dunkel is holding down the grieving man, Klein starts chanting some weird necromancy command. Suddenly their souls begin to emerge from their bodies, and after they are all gathered, they speak to Klein in a language only he understands. The grieving dude is shocked to see his father's soul smiling at him, and he demands to know what he is staring at. Dunkel tells him that what he is witnessing is called soul resonance, and it is a technique that was used 200 years ago during the Northern Plague to liberate the dead. The villagers watch as the souls of their loved ones all float to the afterlife, and after this, the villagers point Klein and Dunkel in the mine's direction. On their way to the mine, Dunkel asks Klein what the spirits said to him, and Klein subtly replies that it was nothing. He says they were just thanking him for helping them find peace, and they also begged him to avenge them. Dunkel is surprised when he hears this, and his conviction that Klein is Archimond's reincarnation crosses his mind again. He also remembers how Klein reacted when he mentioned Archimond earlier that day. Dunkel then unsheathes his sword, and he places it on Klein's neck, telling him that he has one question for him. With a stern and serious voice, Dunkel asks Klein to reveal his true identity.